let's see where we have to read. We have been here. If we discover, no?
Yes.
Okay. So somebody has to read today.
Should I read?
Yes.
If we discover that ignorance and knowledge were two independent powers of consciousness, it might then be that we would have to pursue their difference up to the highest point of consciousness, where they would cease only in an absolute, from which both of them had issued together. Yeah, I will read the footnote 14.
Yes.
In the Upanishads, Vidya and Avidya are spoken of as eternal in the Supreme Brahman, but this can be accepted in the sense of the consciousness of the multiplicity and the consciousness of the oneness, which by coexistence in the Supreme self-awareness became the basis of the manifestation. They would there be two sides of an eternal self-knowledge. It might then be concluded that the only real knowledge is the truth of the superconscient absolute, and that truth of consciousness, truth of cosmos, truth of ourselves in cosmos is at best a partial figure, burdened always with a concomitant presence on encircling penumbra, a pursuing shadow of ignorance. It might even be that an absolute knowledge establishing truth, harmony, order, and an absolute inconscience basing a play of a fantasy, this harmony and this order supporting inexorably its extreme of a falsehood, wrong and suffering, a Manichaean double principle of conflicting and intermingling light and darkness, good and evil, stand at the root of cosmic existence. The idea of certain thinkers that there is an absolute good, but also an absolute evil, both of them an approach to the absolute, might assume consistence. But if we find that knowledge and ignorance are light and shadow of the same consciousness, that the beginning of ignorance is a limitation of knowledge, that it is the limitation that opens the door to a subordinate possibility of a partial illusion and error, that this possibility takes a full body after a purposeful plunge of knowledge into a material inconscience, but that knowledge too emerges along with an emerging consciousness out of the inconscious. Then we can be sure that this fullness of ignorance is, by its own evolution, changing back into a limited knowledge, and can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed and the full truth of things become apparent. The cosmic truth frees itself from the cosmic ignorance. In fact, what is happening is that the ignorance is seeking and preparing to transform itself by a progressive illumination of its darkness into the knowledge that is already concealed within it. The cosmic truth manifested in its real essence and figure would by that transformation reveal itself as essence and figure of the supreme omnipresent reality. It is from this interpretation of existence that we have started, but to verify it, we must observe the structure of our surface consciousness and its relation to what is within it, and above and below it. For so best we can distinguish the nature and scope of the ignorance. In that process, there will appear the nature and scope also of that of which the ignorance is a limitation and deformation, the knowledge, and deformation and the knowledge. In its totality, the spiritual being's abiding self-knowledge and word knowledge.
Yeah. This is the last paragraph of the chapter. And then he starts examining the nature of consciousness, the memory and other things, all sorts of other things, identity and all. So there are several other chapters, and very interesting what is memory and all. But we will now we'll concentrate on the paragraph that we have read today. Okay. Sri Aurobindo has his own concept of how to interpret the apparent inconscience and consciousness, the two ends of spirit and matter. But he always examines also the other theories that can exist, and he says that maybe we can go beyond them. That's always what he's saying. Okay, so if you remember, we are discussing ignorance and knowledge, but then he gives a positive interpretation of the ignorance. He calls it, we need not look at it in a negative way. It is one way of looking at the existence from the two poles. The divine is not creating anything negative. There are other theories that say that yes, there is a division and it is not divine alone, but there is an anti-divine also at the bottom. So this is basically, and he is examining that theory also and giving it some amount of plausibility. But then he corrects it with his own theory. So let's look at what he's saying. I'm reading each sentence. If we discover, now look at that. If we discover, is it not possible that it could be other ways? That's what he's saying. Always he is taking you by the hand and examining each. It's like exploring a huge palace. And he goes into each room and says, okay, now let us look at this room. Now let us look at the other room. Okay. This is his way of doing things. If we discover that ignorance and knowledge were two independent powers of consciousness, it might be that we would have to pursue their difference up to the highest point of consciousness, where they would cease only in an absolute from which both of them had issued together. Okay? In other words, they are issuing from something which is not necessarily God. There is something higher than God and anti-God. That's what he's saying. So we would have to, if we see that, then because we have, why is he saying that? Because he's saying that we have started from the Advaita philosophy. There is one ultimate reality. If that is, we are not going to shift from there. So if somebody is saying that there is consciousness and there is total unconsciousness, there is ananda at the highest level and total suffering at the other end, then we would have to think that there is something above both, which is issuing these two poles up, the seeming opposites. That's what he's saying. We would have to conclude that there is an absolute from which both light and darkness, spirit and matter, both are coming out. Okay, that's what he's saying. It might then be concluded. This is our argument. Okay, he's not agreeing with that. It might then be concluded. Look at the language. It might then be. If you think like that, then it's possible to think like this. That's what he's saying. It might then be concluded that the only real knowledge is the truth of the superconscious absolute, and the truth of consciousness, truth of cosmos, truth of ourselves in cosmos is at best a partial figure, burdened always with a concomitant presence, an encircling penumbra, a pursuing shadow of ignorance. So, look at the sentence, what he's saying. We'll try and understand what he's saying. It might then be concluded, provided you are thinking that light and darkness are absolute opposites with nothing to do with each other. Consciousness and unconsciousness are two independent, self-existing realities. Okay? So the own idea is that they are not independent at all. The world is not independent. It is created. It's a secondary reality. It's a reality, but it's a secondary reality. It is created by the primary reality, which is Satchidananda. Okay, that's what he's saying. But he is examining the opposite view. Okay? It might then be concluded that the only real knowledge is the truth of the superconscious. That's the only thing. Okay, that means, in other words, the ignorance that we see is really something negative. He doesn't agree with that, but he's saying that we would have to conclude like that. It might then be concluded that the only real knowledge is the truth of the superconscious absolute at the highest level. And that truth of consciousness, truth of cosmos, truth of ourselves in cosmos is at best a partial figure, burdened always with a concomitant presence, an encircling penumbra. It's a half light. a pursuing shadow of ignorance. So again, he's thinking, he's saying that because in spiritual experience we experience the transcendent, the cosmic, and the individual. Now look at the language, you will see he's including all. The only true, real knowledge is the truth of the superconscious absolute transcendent. And the truth of consciousness, truth of cosmos, the cosmic, truth of ourselves in the cosmos, the individual. Very clear, na? See, truth of ourselves is what? Your psychic being in the cosmos. So that's the individual. Is at best, all these things are at best a partial figure, burdened always with a concomitant presence. Concomitant presence means at each level, the presence of the absolute is there in a proportionate manner. An encircling penumbra. Encircling penumbra is the cosmic. A pursuing shadow of ignorance at the bottom. It might even be that an absolute knowledge establishing truth, harmony, order, and an absolute inconscience, basing a play of fantasy. Fantasy because the world becomes unreal. At one time, it's a real experience. It's a way of interpreting. So it is granting that it's possible to think of it in this way. Establishing truth, harmony, order, and an absolute inconscience, basing a play of fantasy, disharmony, and disorder, supporting inexorably its extreme of falsehood, wrong, and suffering. A Manichaean double principle of conflicting and intermingling light and darkness, good and evil, stand at the root of cosmic existence. So, Manichaean, he is using an adjective, mani. Okay, Mani, M-A-N-I, is a philosopher, and he must have had some experience also, whatever. So his theory is, like the many other theories, that there is a absolute good and there is an absolute evil. And the evil is not created by God. Okay, that's the theory. A doubles. Okay, which is there in most of the religions. Okay, it is there also in Islam, it is there in other religions also. So he's saying that Manichaean double. Of course, Srebdo and the Advaita philosophy doesn't agree with that. Okay. So, but it's possible to interpret it that way. That's what it's particular. Okay. So, of good and evil stand at the root of cosmic existence. In the cosmic existence, if you go upwards, you will hit absolute truth. If you go downwards, you will hit absolute falsehood. That's what he's saying. The idea of certain thinkers that there is an absolute good, but also an absolute evil, both of them an approach to the absolute, might assume consistence. It might be possible to think of it that way. The theory is possible. That's what he's saying. Both of them an approach to the absolute might assume consistence. It is possible to think it that way. But suppose we start from the opposite knowledge, then we come to a different conclusion. That's what he's saying. But if we find that knowledge and ignorance are light and shadow of the same consciousness, not divided, but grades of the same thing, that the beginning of ignorance is a limitation of knowledge. It's a lessening of knowledge. It's not the opposite of knowledge. Sorry. That is a limitation that opens the door to a subordinate possibility. There's another possibility. The possibility of two absolute opposites is there. But if we discover that they are not really opposites, then what happens? That's what he's saying. A limitation of knowledge. That is a limitation that opens the door to a subordinate possibility of partial illusion and error, that this possibility takes full body after the purposeful plunge of knowledge into a material inconscience. But that knowledge too emerges along with an emerging consciousness out of the inconscious. So he is telling you that we come to the theory of involution. At the highest level, there is absolute good, but the possibility of the seeming opposite is there in it. The absolute consciousness contains in itself as a seed the possibility of total inconscience. That's what he's saying. And at the lower level, the absolute inconscience contains as in seed form the absolute consciousness. So they are not opposites, but they are involved in each other and they are aspects of the same thing. That's what he's saying. And that is absolutely consistent with the Advaita philosophy. Ekameva dvitiyam. Ekameva advitiyam. There is no opposition at all. Everything is one in different grades. Okay? That's what he's saying. If we discover. And of course he has discovered. And Advaita also has discovered that. So we can then be sure that this fullness of ignorance is by its own evolution changing back into a limited knowledge, and can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed and the full truth of things become apparent. The cosmic truth free itself from the cosmic ignorance. So he's saying that at the individual level also there is a evolution of consciousness, and out of this inconscience, consciousness is coming first in the form of life, then it is coming in the form of mind. Why should it stop there? It will go on higher and higher. And the one day the absolute consciousness also will manifest and become apparent. This is what he's saying. And we can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed and the full truth of things become apparent. He is referring to the supermind as the next stage of evolution. The cosmic truth. So this is another thing. At the individual also there is an evolution, but there is also an evolution in the cosmos. In other words, life is cosmic. Then the appearance of mental creatures with mind is also cosmic. Therefore, it will be also cosmic. It will not be that only man will have knowledge. Even it will be very apparent that there is a different race which will incorporate this idea of higher knowledge. That's what he's saying. Okay, so then we can be sure that this fullness of ignorance is by its own evolution, not imposed on it, changing back into a limited knowledge. Limited knowledge is our condition, and can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed and the full truth of things become apparent. The cosmic truth free itself from the ignorance. Now, I want to just point out one thing, because these ideas, small ideas, but they are repeated very often in Sri Aurobindo. He is saying here, we can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed. Okay, he is talking of an assurance. So, in other words, sometimes he places the other thing. The idea of perfectibility is inherent in man. He says this elsewhere. He is saying the same thing here in different words. Okay, is it not true? The animal has no sense of perfectibility. It just lives its life as it is. But when man comes on the scene, he looks at death and he thinks of immortality. He looks at perversion and he thinks that there should be no perversion. When he looks at falsehood, he thinks that there should be truth. So the idea of perfectibility comes with man. That's what he's saying. Okay. This is a sentence he uses very often in Life Divine. The idea of perfectibility comes with man. And that's why man is a crucial step in the evolution upwards. Before that, evolution was mechanical and unconscious. Nature was evolving, but in a very slow manner and unconsciously. But when man comes on the scene, the evolution becomes conscious because yoga becomes possible. That's what he's saying. Okay? So look at the words, and can feel the assurance that the limitation itself will be removed. You can go to the spiritual planes of consciousness and later, and the full truth of things become apparent. That would be the supermind. The cosmic truth free itself from the cosmic ignorance. There is a truth in the ignorance, and that truth will come out. In fact, what is happening is that ignorance is seeking and preparing to transform itself by progressive illumination of its darknesses. Darknesses, not darkness, because there can be a darkness of consciousness, there can be a darkness of force, there can be a darkness of ananda. Okay, so he uses a plural. Progressive illumination of its darknesses into the knowledge, and that is already concealed within it. The idea of involution and evolution is being missed by the others who say that there is opposition between God and matter. There is opposition between spirit and matter. Okay, so that's what it is. The cosmic truth manifested in its real essence and figure would, by that transformation, reveal itself as essence and figure of the supreme omnipresent reality. So he is using the word figure. Okay. There is the absolute truth of the spirit, and the world is not unreal, but it's a relative reality. It's a shadow. It's a figure. Okay. There is a difference between mother and mother's photograph. The photograph is real, but it is not mother, and yet it is mother. It will lead you to mother. So in that sense, all symbols, okay, look at this, my symbol, I don't know if you got the video, but the symbol represents mother. So the world is only a symbol. Everything in the physical world is a symbol of the spirit. That's what he's saying. And through that, you can go there. It's a degraded form of the reality. It's not unreality. It's a degraded form of reality. It is from this interpretation of existence that we have started. So my theory of the Advaita is this, that there is only one reality, and that reality is manifesting itself and becomes apparent unconsciousness, but there is hiding behind these limited forms and seeming ignorance. There is a knowledge, and there is also the divine presence behind all these forms. That's what he's saying. We have started by that. Why is he saying we have started? If you go back to the 4th chapter in the Life Divine, reality omnipresent. Chapter 1, the emergence of the divine consciousness. Then chapter 2, refusal of the the materialist denial. Then the 3rd chapter, the refusal of the ascetic. 4th chapter, reality omnipresent. That's what we are starting from. Okay? There is a reality which is omnipresent. In other words, it's not only transcendent, but it's in the cosmos, and it's even in the individual. Every stone also has got a divine presence. It is from this interpretation of the existence that we have started. But to verify it, we must observe the structure of our surface consciousness and its relation to what is within it and above and below it. So I am giving you a theory, somebody is saying, but don't believe me, let's examine. This is the scientific spirit, no? Absolutely. This science wants perfect proof of everything. So it's valid in a certain sense. Okay. So let's have proof. And how to do that? What is our surface consciousness? We have a body, we have a vital, and we have a mind. That's our surface consciousness. And let us see what is inside that, and what is above it, and what is below it. Let's examine the phenomenon of consciousness fully. Let's not limit ourselves and see, and then come to conclusions. That's what he's saying. It is to verify it. We must observe the structure of our surface consciousness and its relation to what is within it and above and below it. Within it, the intraconscient. Above it, the superconscient. Below it, the inconscient and the subconscient also. For so best we can distinguish the nature and scope of the ignorance. We will understand why there is ignorance. We need not interpret it as something negative. That's only a limitation of knowledge. In that process, there will appear the nature and scope also of that of which the ignorance is a limitation and deformation. The knowledge in its totality, the spiritual beings, abiding self-knowledge and world knowledge. There is a world knowledge which is hiding behind the forms, and there is also a abiding. Abiding means permanent. It lives there. Self-knowledge. In man also, there is self-knowledge. It is there in man and it's there in the universe. That's what he's saying. So, he has not yet finished his discussion. So now the next is we start examining this consciousness that seems to be so mysterious. And the first thing that he starts examining, there are a lot of chapters with this. Okay, memory, self-consciousness, and ignorance. So memory is a very interesting thing. Even the animals have a little bit of memory. They hide food one day and next day they come and eat that food. The dogs also bury the bones and they come and again the next day they take it. Crows also do that. They put the food in the tree somewhere and then come back next day to get it. The leopard also does that. The leopard also takes its kill, puts it in a higher tree so that other animals can't have it, and then they come back next day to eat it. Okay, so that completes the ignorance and knowledge. So what is the gist of this? What he's saying is that ignorance and knowledge are not absolute opposites. They are seeming opposites. And it is intentional. It is not something that is self-existent forever. Only the spirit, Satchidananda or God, call it whatever you want, is the absolute truth. And it is manifesting itself. And there's an involution and an evolution. Now let us start examining what my theory is. That's what he's saying. So the next chapter, memory, self-consciousness, and the ignorance. Okay. So memory, yeah, big discussion on memory. Very interesting. We'll see what he is, because he has to come back into modern psychology also. He examines that. Okay. So what's
So
the time?
Rangada,
Yeah, tell me.
in a nutshell, we can say there is an absence of knowledge is ignorance, and absence of ignorance is the knowledge.
Yes, you could say that. But as somebody, yesterday, I was having a discussion with Gitanjali, and she said that can we define ignorance in a positive way and say that ignorance is when you see the multiplicity? I think I would agree with that fully. So you can define ignorance as seeing the multiplicity only and thinking it to be real. It's one way of looking at things. It's not a falsehood, but your partial view. And when you see the oneness, that's a knowledge. Vidya and avidya. Okay? But what Shilpa also said, you can define it that way. Ignorance is absence of knowledge, but yet then they will define. And knowledge is absence of ignorance. But there's a gradation between the two. Huh? There's a gradation. It's not absolute. This idea of gradation is very important because that is the consequence of involution and evolution. Okay? So, we have got time. Shall we start the next chapter?
Yes.
Okay. Then, Acharadi, if you have the time and the text, you can start reading. But if she's there. Okay.
Okay, yes, Rangada.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Memory,
Yeah.
self-consciousness, and the ignorance. Some speak of the self-nature of things. Others say that it is time. Shvetaswara Upanishad. Two are the forms of Brahman, time and the timeless. Maitri Upanishad. Life was born, and from life, the flowing ocean of being, and on the ocean of time was born to whom is subjected every seeing creature. Rig Veda. Memory is greater. Without memory, men could think and know nothing. As far as goes the movement of memory, there he ranges at will. Chandogya Upanishad. This is he who is that which sees, touches, hears, smells, tastes, thinks, understands, acts in us, a conscious being, a self of knowledge. Prashna Upanishad. Shall I go on to the paragraph, Rangada?
Yes, you can. Let's read the first paragraph. Yeah.
In any survey of the dual character of a consciousness, we are first to look at the ignorance. For ignorance trying to turn into knowledge is a normal status. To begin with, it is necessary to consider some of the essential movements of this partial awareness of self and things, which works in us as a mediator between the complete self-knowledge and all knowledge and the complete inconscience. And from that starting point, find its relation to the greater consciousness below our surface. There is a line of thought in which great stress is laid upon the action of memory. It has even been said that memory is the man. It is memory that constitutes our personality and holds cemented the foundation of our psychological being. For it links together our experiences and relates them to one and the same individual entity. This is an idea which takes its stand on our existence in the succession of time and as the key to essential truth. Even when it does not regard the whole of existence as process or as cause and effect in the development of some kind of self-regulating energy as karma. But process is merely a utility. It is a habitual adoption of certain effective relations which might, in the infinite possibility of things, have been arranged otherwise. For the production of effects which might equally have been quite different. The real truth of things lies not in their process but behind it, in whatever determines, affects, or governs the process, not in effectuation so much as in the will or power that affects, and not so much in will or power as in the consciousness of which will is the dynamic form, and in the being of which power is the dynamic value. But memory is only a process of consciousness, a utility. It cannot be the substance of being or the whole of our personality. It is simply one of the workings of consciousness, as radiation is one of the workings of light. It is self that is the man, or if we regard only a normal surface existence, mind is the man. For man is the mental being. Memory is only one of the many powers and processes of the mind, which is at present the chief action of consciousness force in our dealings with self, world, and nature.
Very interesting, para, and it's quite long. So we are already at 8:30. So what I propose is we'll do this next time. But in the meanwhile, we can have a small discussion on memory. It's a very interesting thing, memory. Huh? So in old age, okay, memory. Now there is a theory that memory is really the most important thing, because suppose from moment to moment you don't remember what you have done. I have a case like that at home now. Na? Dementia is exactly that happens. But interestingly, those things which have been impressed very firmly in the past on your brain, those things remain. Okay. But what happened yesterday and what happened 2 minutes back, they don't remember. I have a case at home where he doesn't know whether he had his breakfast or not. He doesn't remember whether he has gone to the bathroom or not. He doesn't know whether he has brushed his teeth or not. It is as bad as that. Okay. So memory has gone, immediate memory, but the memory of past things is there. So the theory that if memory is not there, that constitutes the essence of man, doesn't agree with that. It's obvious. But memory itself is very interesting, because when you have a spiritual experience, it is not that something new has come into your being. It is something, I knew about this all the time and I had forgotten about it. Okay. Spiritual experience also is often spoken of as remembering what you have lost. And that's a fact. Okay. There is also in the Gita, if you remember, there is if there is no peace, there is a whole scale, okay, of things. First, when you don't control yourself, desire. In speaking of desire, when you have satisfied your desire, there is a temporary pleasure. But when you don't satisfy your desire, there is frustration. And frustration leads to disturbance in the being, and disturbance being in the being leads to loss of memory. I'm not giving all the steps, but loss of memory, and loss of memory will give you vinasha, complete destruction. So this is the in the Gita, it is there. So, but this memory that the Gita is speaking about is a memory that you are the divine, not the ordinary memory that we are thinking of. And the ordinary memory is also very interesting. It is starting from the very low level. Don't think that only human beings have memory, and animals also have a certain memory, as we just now spoke. But is there a memory in plants also? They have found that yes, it is there. It's fantastic. Okay. I'll tell you an experiment which they did. Maybe you know it also. There is a hall in which many plants are there. It's the same plant, okay? But there are 10 pots and all of them are the same plant. They experimented this, and one man comes in and destroys one plant, okay? And when you destroy a plant, there are nervous reactions which can be measured on a oscillograph, okay? The pattern is very clearly one of pain. It's a pattern that you recognize, that when this pattern is there, the plant is having a painful experience. Now, next day when he comes, okay, before he has entered into the room, just he's entering into the room, the plant starts giving the vibrations of pain. This man has done this to me, okay? It's not like memory that we have, but there's a vital memory, a nervous sensational memory. And not only that, what is interesting is these waves go and tell the other plants also, and they also start vibrating in the same way. This is an experiment, scientific experiment, not a psychological experiment only. They have said repeatedly, they have made the experiment, and that's what they see. In other words, there is this memory in plants. And Narad was telling me, because he is very much interested in plants, no? Narad is very much interested in flowers and plants. He was telling me that suppose there is a parasite on one tree, it sends vibrations and warning the other plants also. Okay, there is a communication, just like in the animal world, when a predator, suppose the monkeys are there or the birds are there, and there is a predator. It could be a leopard or a tiger or a lion or whatever. When they come, the monkeys start making sounds of warning and warn everybody else. This phenomena takes place even with plants. That's the interesting thing. So memory is there at a very, very low level. In fact, Sri Aurobindo speaks of memory even in the atom. So this is the memory. It's a very interesting phenomena. And Sri Aurobindo is going to examine this. What is memory? Okay. So we'll start next time. It's 8:35 now. But memory is something fantastic. We only think of memory of the past. But can there be a memory of the future also? That's the interesting thing. And it is true that there can be a memory of the future. 1920, Sri Aurobindo is saying that India will be free. It's a memory of the future because he has gone to another level of consciousness and there you are seeing the future. You could call it a memory of a future. Okay, what else to say? You can't use any other word, but memory of the future also is possible. Okay, a memory of the future, absolute memory of the future. I am the divine. We have lost it. We have lost that memory. Okay, so we have already crossed our time. So we'll stop today, and tomorrow we will. Not tomorrow, sorry. Tomorrow is synthesis, and next Tuesday. No, sorry. Yeah, Tuesday.
Wednesday.
Huh? Yeah. Wednesday and Thursday. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. All of you.
Have a nice day.